so we are constantly advising and directing. Sorry, I thought you meant more this Youth Advisory Council. So if it's that one, sense with UNDP, a great opportunity. You certainly have an NDC, the finance minister, the planning minister. This is often the most difficult moment in a sort of 2-week period of a conference of the parties. The first week is over. You suddenly recognize that there are a number of fundamentally difficult issues that are not easily resolvable. The clock is ticking. The end of the COP is in sight. So for a presidency, this is the moment where it needs to step forward. And I think the UK is trying with its paper now to draw a number of critical threads together to allow consensus to drive the resolution of those areas that are difficult to resolve. That is always a very important piece of international diplomacy, but also of COP psychology, because in sometimes focusing on what we disagree on, we lose sight of a lot of what we actually agree on. And I think Glasgow already demonstrated in its first week that the world has moved on from Paris, that the Paris Agreement has actually delivered in the sense that countries have submitted, 174 countries have submitted their revised national climate strategies, and most of them carry within them a higher level of ambition, which was always the intent of having this 5-year cycle. There is no reason to be complacent. Glasgow will not deliver the magic wand. The world is in a very complicated stage in the midst of a pandemic. I think what we're underestimating here is the enormous fiscal stress in which countries will find themselves in the next year or two, particularly developing countries. So financing is such a critical part of that overall confidence in the world working together. And I think, frankly speaking, the wealthier part of the world has fallen short on its promises for too long. So one critical outcome of Glasgow will have to be an unequivocal signal that co-investing in this climate agenda is something that wealthier countries really take seriously. And it's difficult for a poor country to watch $14 trillion being mobilized in 12 months in terms of pandemic stimulus packages in the rich part of the world, and then not being able to come up with $100 billion in co-financing when, in fact, developing countries are expected to spend multiples of that in the next few years each year on moving towards low-carbon infrastructure.
So we had expected, and this is not in the text, a regular ratchet that countries would have to come back every year to close the gap until we are sure that we're going to stay below 1.5 degrees. That's a quite weak text. There's quite interesting good text. There's a signal that there should be a phase out of coal. We need a date on that, and a phase out of fossil fuel subsidies also would be good to have a date, but I think that's the first time we see that kind of text in a UN draft text. But the funding mechanism is weak. The support for adaptation is weak. There's no funding numbers on the table. So I think it will be hard for the most vulnerable countries to feel confident and have trust that the developed world is going to support them. What are they going to support in the future for countries that are the poorest in order to deal with the impacts of climate change? So they need to see more funding for being able to adapt to climate change, and funding for what happens when you lose your home, what happens when you have damage, loss and damage. Those things are absent from the text right now. Right now, I'm looking to the United States. I think that they need to come forward with the financing and the funding for the poorest countries that they have not delivered over the last years to build the trust that is needed, and also be ready to come back to the table every single year. The United States and, of course, Saudi Arabia, but President Biden needs to be the leader that we need him to be.